Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Godbreaker. The man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Godbreaker in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Legendary black actor John Amos passed away in August at 84 years old. And most of us didn't know that John Amos passed away until recently because his son basically kept that information private, and even his own sister didn't know that John Amos had passed away until it was announced on the news. Now that's really sad because John Amos was somebody who I believe deserved to be acknowledged on the time that he had passed, because he had one of the greatest careers in the entertainment industry in the 20th century and is considered to be one of the greatest black actors in the 20th century because he played the first black father ever to be featured on an American sitcom. Now, John Amos's career started in around 1970 when he played the WJM TV weatherman Gordie Howard on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and as he appeared on 13 episodes of that show, that basically was our first sight of John Amos, an actor who would go on to have one of the greatest careers in Hollywood as related to black actors. Now, John Amos is 3 years later, in 1973 or 1974, made his debut as Henry Evans, who would be the template for his signature role of James Evans on the sitcom Good Times. And on the sitcom Maude, which was a spin-off of All in the Family, John Amos would play Henry Evans, the firefighter husband of Esther Roll's Florida Evans, on the All in the Family spin-off Maude. Now, on that spin-off, this was everybody's first sight of Esther Roll and John Amos, and as one of America's greatest black TV sitcom couples, and the first black TV sitcom couple to ever make an appearance on television. And after making their debut on the show Maude, this was spun off into its own show, Good Times, a show that was basically set in Chicago in the Cabrini Green Projects. And this show that was supposed to be set in the Cabrini Green Projects was actually supposed to be a vehicle for just Esther Roll. However, Esther Roll advocated to get a father on the show because she didn't want to see a stereotype presented about black families only being run by single mothers. And as she advocated to get a father on the show, similar to what Marla Gibbs did on the sitcom 227, this is where John Amos was brought onto the show, and brought onto the show to try to show that there were fathers who were truly cared about their children, and try to shatter the narrative that the network wanted to program in people's minds, that there were no black fathers in the home, and this is why many black families were in poverty. This is what college-educated John Amos and Esther Roll advocated to do, and push back against Norman Lear's plans to make the first black sitcom to be filled with stereotypes. And bringing John Amos on to Good Times basically kept that show from falling into extreme racist stereotypes, because as John Amos came on the show, he made major pushback against people like Norman Lear and many of the writers as related to the depiction of foundational black Americans, and looked to push back because he did not want people to see black people as a stereotype of black families being where the father abandoned the home. And that's what John Amos looked to advocate and push back against on, and basically kept the show from becoming a modern-day minstrel show, which is what the producers originally possibly planned to do. Now, with John Amos on the show, we did get that father in the home, but sadly, he didn't have enough influence to be able to make his character into someone who had a career similar to what was presented on Maude, because on Maude, Henry Evans was a firefighter and had a good job, but on Good Times they made the character into some sort of functional guy who was illiterate, who dropped out of school, who was just working at these low-level jobs, and that was where John Amos was basically limited as related to his pushback, and they basically made the character of James Evans into a guy who was basically a frustrated man who was living in the projects. However, that ran diametrically opposed to what was happening in actual projects like Cabrini Green, where many black men did have jobs if they were there, and if those guys did have jobs, they usually basically stayed there for a little while, got their money up, and then eventually left. That's something that Norman Lear didn't want to present, because in his idea of black life, he wanted to show black people in the ghetto, because the white leftist basically wants to keep black people in a psychological ghetto where they believe they could not move themselves forward. And that was another problem with the Good Time show. It didn't really show black people having a good time. It showed black people being miserable. And John Amos kept pushing back and advocating to try to improve the quality of life for these characters. Unfortunately, the people at CBS and Norman Lear got frustrated and basically decided to terminate John Amos for pushing back on their ideas for the show by killing James Evans off in a car crash at the end of season 3. And season 4, basically, this led to Florida being the single mother that they originally planned on the show. Now, a year after John Amos wound up leaving Good Times, he wound up playing the adult version of Kunta Kinte and wound up getting his second signature role, a role that got him an Emmy nomination for playing the adult Kunta Kinte in the miniseries Roots. And after playing Kunta Kinte in the miniseries Roots and getting an Emmy nomination, he then went on to get a lot of great recurring roles on television, and also eventually wound up starting to star in movies, and is known for a signature role of playing Mr. McDowell in the 1988 movie Coming to America, where he played another signature father as Mr. McDowell, who ran the McDowell's restaurant in this comedy that was basically about the Prince of Zamunda, who basically was coming to America to look for a wife. And that role that John Amos played is so great that people still remember it to this day. It showed his brilliant comic timing. It showed his brilliant ability to be able to, again, go out here and really interact with a great cast, which featured legendary actors like the late James Earl Jones, the late Madge Sinclair, iconic comedian Eddie Murphy, and Arsenio Hall. Coming to America is considered I believe one of the greatest movies out of the golden age of black cinema, and shows how you can make a great comedy and show a positive image of black people. I mean, I was really glad to see John Amos be a part of that film and play the father he originally wanted to play. I mean, that was the opportunity given to him by director John Landis, was the opportunity to finally play a responsible, conscientious father, a responsible, conscientious father who looked out for his children. That's what he wanted to have James Evans be on Good Times, but was hampered by Norman Lear and the people at CBS who wanted to see stereotypes. But we finally got to see him playing a balanced, humanized character in Coming to America, and I'll always consider that to be one of his great signature roles as a performer. And John Amos has had, again, more roles after that, such as his role in the 1990s, where he eventually played in 704 Hauser Street with Norman Lear, but that sitcom didn't last long. That was a sitcom where a black man basically bought the home of Archie Bunker and was living in Queens, where Archie Bunker lived, and also continued to work on different shows. He worked in the drama of CBS The District with Craig T. Nelson, where he played Major Ethan Baker, and he had a recurring role on The West Wing, where he was the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Percy Fitzwallace. And John Amos had, again, a long storied career of great roles and paved the way for the image of positive black manhood and positive black masculinity, and showed us examples of positive images of black manhood and black masculinity and that's what he will be remembered for, creating iconic images of black manhood and black masculinity, showing us that a black man could have the strength of character not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera as well. And that's why John Amos, I believe, deserved better than the way he was treated by his son. Now, John Amos's legacy basically is one where he has two children. He has two children by a white Eastern European wife who he was married to in the 1970s, and eventually that marriage wound up ending. And as that marriage wound up ending, this is where John Amos's two children they've been having struggles with each other since the 1980s and 1990s. There's been a dispute between them, and sadly that dispute possibly led to the complete mistreatment of John Amos as alleged about his son. Now, there had been reports that John Amos's son, as he was looking to take over his father's affairs, had participated in alleged elder abuse and basically was keeping John Amos away from the public. And that's possibly one of the reasons why we didn't get to hear about John Amos's passing, and even his own sister didn't get to hear about his passing. And that's really sad that you had John Amos's family out here being dysfunctional, even though John Amos presented the image of functionality and the ideal image of black manhood and black masculinity. Sadly, it seems that his biracial son didn't really think about his father, and possibly subconsciously had such serious anger and contempt for his father regarding the dissolution of that marriage, and that possibly was one of the reasons why all of us didn't find out about the passing of John Amos, was the anger that he had regarding his father and his mother having that divorce. And it's really sad that this happened, because this whole situation of his death shouldn't have gone out in this way. I mean, it's really sad that John Amos, who presented the ideal of black manhood and black masculinity, basically had his whole final days and his passing basically marred by his biracial son, who was angry about the dissolution of the marriage, possibly. This is the saddest part about the whole situation regarding the passing of John Amos, but it does not do anything to his legacy, because with John Amos's legacy, he basically leaves a legacy as one of the greatest black actors of the 20th century, and is known for playing the first black father on American television, not to mention a series of signature roles, including that of Henry Evans on Maude, James Evans on Good Times, Mr. McDowell in Coming to America, and many other roles such as Adult Kunta Kinte. John Amos leaves behind a great legacy on the screen, and that legacy will not be tarnished even by family. That's the whole thing that was great about John Amos, is that he basically took care of his business, even though he had issues, and still tried to go out here and present an image of black manhood and black masculinity. And it's a shame that most of us didn't get a chance to mourn John Amos at the time of his death. It's a shame that we never got that chance. But now that we know that John Amos is no longer with us and with the ancestors, I can honestly say thank you to John Amos, because he presented, again, an image of black manhood and black masculinity that showed an example of how a black man can be a man behind the camera and in front of the camera. And that's something I'm proud to see as a black man and a creator of positive black fiction, like I do in the SJS Direct universe with characters like John Haynes. I mean, even though Good Times was filled with stereotypes, he went out here and did his best behind the camera to fight for the image of black people, and that's something I'll always be proud of to see for John Amos as related to his legacy. And John Amos is a man I can honestly say that I'm glad to say rest in power, because he did great work in his time here on Earth, and that time here on Earth he basically went out here and looked out for black people, and looked out for black people in front of the camera and behind it. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis Legacy. The sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.